Right. Okay, here we go again.
Oh, hey. So here we are. I'm Phil Wyman with Wild Theology, and this is my Convince Me to Vote for Trump episode with my first one of this with Jon Putnam from Marblehead, Mass. You're yeah, and you got your red hat on.
Yeah, that's right. My imitation, my ersatz mega hat. That's right.
Yeah. And so John is going to try and convince me to vote for Donald Trump. And and I posted just a little bit ago that there's not a snowball's chance in May that that's going to happen.
Yeah, well, it's funny. Since you say that, you picked the picture of me, obviously advisedly, because
right where it was snowing in May.
So,
yeah.
I have hope for you, Phil. It could happen.
Yeah. So you think now? I'm taking this from the perspective of being, Christian pastor, and wondering why on earth anybody would vote for Donald Trump. And now you're Christian, and you think I should vote for Donald Trump?
Well, yes, actually, yes. And so here's the basic line of thinking. I don't think as Christians that we are ultimately, although in America we select our leaders by voting. The fact is that God says the powers that be are ordained of God.
Right.
To me, that doesn't mean. I mean, you could argue. Yes. So did God? Is it God's will that Donald Trump is the president? Sure, fine. I'm not gonna. That's not the reason. It was His will that Obama was the president. There's all. The reason why this matters is because voting is in some ways kind of a subversion of the divine order, because that we have arrived at because when we believed in the divine right of kings, we got some pretty bad results. And so people said, we're going to do this ourselves. Thank you very much. And so now we're in a situation in history where the people have the right to select their leaders.
Right.
But that's not, that doesn't, there's nothing about that process that is particularly godly, or that says that the people from whom I'm supposed to choose are people that God would approve of. And so, I vote for Donald Trump as an American in the 21st century who happens to have the privilege of voting, not because I think Donald Trump is the be all and the end all, but because as between the alternatives, his alternative is better. Now, the question is, why is that?
Yeah. That's my question. Why is that alternative better? I mean, if we're looking at the lesser of two evils, I'm not sure I can agree.
Well, and I think that's totally understandable. So I think we are looking at two evils. I'll give you that.
Right.
So then the question becomes, which is the lesser one? But the first thing I want to say, though, is that I don't view this as being I'm not adopting Donald Trump's morality or endorsing him or supporting him, or even the language that we use. I voted for Donald Trump. That's not what I'm going to advocate. I'm going to say I'm pulling the lever or putting the mark next to Donald Trump's name for reasons that I think are, I'll give you, but they are not about, they have nothing to do with the godliness of Donald Trump or anything like that. So what's reason number one? Reason number one is we live in a system, and the system is supposed to secure rights for people. That's the fundamental job of the government, is to secure people's rights. That's a very limited job. And I am more inclined to vote for somebody who limits their job to doing what the government's designed to do, rather than expanding that role increasingly, as has happened for the last 100 years. So from the perspective of, do I believe in smaller government or larger government? I believe in smaller government. Donald Trump has not done a great job of reducing the size of the government. And the last, budget has $1 trillion deficit even before the coronavirus. So, we are again talking about two evils, but I think the budget deficit and the size of the government will be less under Trump.
Doesn't it scare you that he's doing things like trying to shut down social media and his whole fake news thing, and trying to close the press, as it were. Right? I mean, that's like First Amendment rights aggression against it. Doesn't that trouble you?
Of course it does. It's idiotic, and at some level it's worse than idiotic. It's actually, carried to its logical extreme. I actually think that's impeachable. But, but the great thing that caused me to vote for Trump the first time, and that caused me to vote for Trump the second time, is that the system of checks and balances. And so if going the other way, the big government way, actually has the approval of, in principle, the House and the Senate and the media and the universities. So, for example, we saw when Obama became president in 2008, and we had both houses of Congress were Democratic. The media fell all over themselves for Obama for reasons that always escaped me. And the universities, of course, think that he's a wonderful progressive person. And so the system functions badly when power and ideas are all leaning in the same direction for the same reason that a boat is likely to capsize. Whether you put everybody on the right or everybody on the left, it's more likely to capsize if you put everybody on one side. So everybody hates Trump, which to me is actually one of the great things that I'm counting on, is the hatred of Trump, because that as soon as Trump comes along and says, I'm going to shut down Facebook, and he's like, you know what? You've got all these people who are not going to let him do that, which is exactly the way that it ought to be. Whereas when Obama said something, ridiculous like that, or when he said, I've got a pen and a phone, people said, oh yeah, that's so great. He's able to get around the obstruction of Congress because he has a pen and a phone. And so there's this endorsement of executive power when you agree with what the executive is doing, and there's a resistance to executive power when you disagree. And I'm counting on the disagreement to keep Trump in check. And I think that's actually long run for the country, a much safer position to be in than when everybody's on the left side of the boat leaning over. It's more likely to flip.
So in challenging that thought, you previously made a comment about impeachable offenses, right?
Yes.
And yet we had this moment of impeachment that then went to the Senate, who appeared to walk in lockstep, other than, our senator from Utah and our former governor of Massachusetts, Romney, who said, oh yeah, we should be listening to this. But the rest of the Senate said, oh no, we don't even want to listen to the information. Didn't that appear that there was a strong swing toward putting all the power into the office of the executive position of president, almost as though, Trump sometimes sounds like he wants to be king? It seems like counterintuitive to what you're saying.
Well, there's 2 points that you're making, I think. Two or three. So let me take them. Let's start with impeachment. I think that I was one of those people that thought that the idea of impeachment was, so to speak, trumped up. It wasn't, they weren't. The high crimes and misdemeanors were basically people who were pissed off at Trump, but couldn't really point to, grounds for removal or, disruption of of an elected leader. And I think they lacked credibility because this is something that they've been angling for basically since the first day. So this was the single best shot they had at it, and it wasn't a very good shot. It just wasn't. It was weak tea. So what we were talking about was, Trump actually trying to abrogate the First Amendment. Now, if that's something that you're doing, like if you said, I'm going to send in troops and they are going to prevent Facebook from operating because they're criticizing me, it's like, impeach him today, impeach him last week. But the whole, Ukraine thing and
looked pretty strong to me.
Well, I'm not even saying it was wrong. I'm not saying it was wrong. Well, I'm not saying that the accusation was not right. I'm not defending what he did. There was all this crap stupid right-wing argument about like, well, of course that's what he did. It's totally, that's what we want leaders to do. No, that was just, he overstepped. He shouldn't have done that. It was a dumb idea. But on the other hand, he also handled it badly. If he'd said, on further reflection, I actually think that I shouldn't have handled it that way.
Right.
Thanks for the reminder. I apologize.
Right. Now, problematically though, the Senate just says, "Oh no, we don't even want to hear it."
Well,
right now, come on.
Sort of like, well, I think that's true. But when you think about a trial, the Senate was basically acting in a summary judgment role and saying there is no, even construing the evidence in the light most favorable to the plaintiff, there is no way that the plaintiff can prove the charge. So therefore, there's no point in hearing the evidence because there's such a gap between the charge and the evidence.
Right.
That happens in trials all the time. And so I think this was basically a summary judgment determination. You're not going to win, so why?
Yeah, that's what it was. That was. Yeah, so and it was basically you're not going to win because there's more of us than you, right?
Well,
and that's kind of the political nature of impeachment.
Right,
it happened with Clinton. It's
I think that's true. I mean, in other words, that's kind of the strongman's. So there's two arguments. One of them is the strongman argument, and then the other is the did the charges justify, or did the evidence justify the charges?
Right.
So the more nuanced and favorable argument is, well, they couldn't prove the charges, and or they didn't rise to the level of an impeachable offense. And the other argument is basically the strongman. We had more votes, and it's hard to say. Right. It's hard to say which one of those carried the day because in the end, the vote was, not to hear the evidence. So
right. Yeah. Now, somebody, friend of mine from the UK, Dot Gosling, she says, watching from England, and can't see that he's being kept in check. It's just bewildering to her that anybody votes for Trump. So now I see this a lot from my friends in the UK. They do look at it like, wow, he's just off the rails and not being kept in check.
I think so. That's a very rhetorically, I think that's a very understandable point. So, and what I mean by that is, let me put it this way. I think that Donald Trump's superpower is shamelessness, and so he says anything, and he doesn't care whether he's telling the truth. And part of the Trump base actually think that's great because he does not care what people think about him, so he can't be shamed. So, and in some senses, that actually is a superpower because he doesn't act as he's not constrained by polite society and what people think of him in Washington because he doesn't give a crap what people think in Washington about him because he's not from Washington, and that's what the base loves, and that allows him to do things that a person who lived in Washington and cared about people's opinions wouldn't be able to do. That being said, shamelessness is not exactly next to godliness in the list of human virtues. Mm-hmm. So it's like listening to Trump is like listening to a guy at the circus say, "You are about to see the greatest show on earth." Well, when you go to the circus and somebody says this is the greatest show on earth, you don't go, "Is it really the greatest show on earth? That's amazing. How did I get tickets to the greatest show on earth?" You go like, "Yeah, it's, I'm sure it's going to be fun. It'll be interesting to see." But you discount that because it's not real. And so I view listening to Donald Trump as listening to a carnival barker talking about everything is the greatest and the most and the worst and the best. Right. And you're just like, I don't hear that. And what I pay attention to instead of all that stuff is what does he actually do and what do the people around him allow him to do? And when you look at the things that he does, as opposed to the things that he says, I think he actually is constrained. So even the whole stupid thing in the Lafayette Square, we marched in front of the church and held the Bible.
Oh my!
Stupid dumb move.
That. Well, but isn't that was one of? Yes, it's part of what he says because it was a photo op, right? But it was also very clearly what he does. He showed his hand in how unrestrained or how unwise he is in dealing with social unrest and protest. We're looking at somebody who's the executive head of the United States, the head of the military, and he wants to throw the army at him. You know what I'm saying? What the heck?
And Phil, it's the greatest army on earth. We've got some of the finest young men and women in those armed forces, and we're going to take the vicious dogs and the AK-47s, and we're going to, he says all that bullshit.
Well, he says that, but on the other hand, in some ways, he's right in the sense that we have the most intimidating military force, and to have the head of that force then say, and we're going to put it at you if you're protesting on the streets as a threat. Woo! I mean, we had the Pentagon go. That's not what we're here for.
But see, that's exactly the point. In a country that was truly not free. I mean, can you imagine, Kim Jong-il saying, or whatever his name is, Kim Jong-un saying, we're going to sic the military on the protesters, and the North Korean army going, that's a really bad idea, and by the way, it violates our constitution, and we think that you shouldn't handle it that way. That's not how it works in North Korea. The first guy who says that, they cut off his head. The second guy who says that, they cut off his head. And the third guy goes, okay, yeah, we're going to send in the military.
Right.
So I sort of look at this and I go like, the system is working, because even the generals say, this really is not what you want to be doing. So people are horrified by what he says. When it actually gets down to, is there military in the streets hurting people? No, there isn't, because wiser heads prevail. So
if he takes it further, do we end up with a military coup in the United States? I mean, as a nation, we're pretty good at revolution. We not only had a revolution, we had a revolution inside of ourselves with a civil war, and and right now we're kind of looking at 60s revisited, right?
Well, there's a lot of emotion. Whether there is revolution is I think a particular thing, and and I think that unfortunately, the recent events have actually exposed a lot of Trump's real weaknesses, which are that the president during times like this needs to be somebody who is stable, comforting, hopeful, conciliatory, wise, and who can actually propose concrete steps to move us towards dialogue. He doesn't really do any of those things well, and so but that doesn't mean, I think this is going to hurt him in the election. But it doesn't mean that we are closer to revolution. It means that we are further from having the present unrest contained and channeled into something constructive. And that's sad, but it's not revolution.
Yeah. So Christy Pattamore, a friend of mine from Northern England, says people don't care about leaders. Their leaders not telling the truth. And if that's the case, which it kind of looks that way, people pick their team and then they just go for it. If that's the case, is it more problematic to vote for Donald Trump because he's not a person who can deliberate between two warring sides? He's just going to add fuel to the fire.
I think it's a really good question, and I think Christie's point is actually very well taken, because to me, in these times, and by that I mean not just Donald Trump's administration, but sort of where we find ourselves, the truth is an increasingly scarce commodity, and people seem to care less and less about it on both sides. Sometimes that lack of regard for the truth is delivered by a carnival barker. It's the greatest show on earth.
Right.
Delivered in a very smooth Ivy League style. If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. This sort of thing.
Yeah.
So the question is, which form of lying do you prefer? And and as a Christian, I sort of say, like, the problem for me is that there's several problems. One of them is I'm going to vote for somebody who doesn't tell me the truth, regardless of who I vote for. And number two, I have to transcend this, because I have to love the truth, even if the people who are my elected leaders don't love the truth.
Right.
So in terms of voting for Donald Trump, I'm resigned to the fact that regardless of who I vote for, that person is not going to tell me the truth. Trump is particularly obnoxious in the way that he doesn't tell the truth. A less obnoxious person actually, in some ways is more dangerous, because it's harder to tell when they're lying.
Right.
Easy to tell with Trump. It's harder to tell lying.
Yeah, that was Slavoj Žižek's comment about who would you vote for, Hillary or Trump, in the last election. And here comes one of the world's most popular philosophers saying, well, I'd vote for Trump, although I think it's obscene. And his reason was that at least it'll create some revolution that'll tear the system apart. Maybe something else can come out of it, right? So that was his thinking. So Larry Higgins, he makes the comment, both Republicans and Democrats have made a career online. So in a sense, he's saying what you're saying, we're stuck with liars if we're going to vote. And that's acceptable?
Well, no, I think, and this is where I think you have to go back to where I started, because I've wrestled with this as a Christian. I think ever since I was a little kid, I had a very deep attachment to America. I believed America was good. And it's taken me decades, really, to reconcile myself to the fact that America is the world. And as a Christian, what I care about is the kingdom. So the fact that the world lets me down and that people of the world's institutions are deficient and defective and liars is something that shouldn't surprise me. So I'm not voting for a liar. I don't support lying by voting for a liar. I'm an American. I live in a democracy. In a democracy, we vote. There's this whole system for selecting candidates. And those two candidates, it turns out, are more likely than not going to be one kind of a liar or another. That's sad. It's the world.
Yeah. So back to Christie's comment. It was actually not a comment. It was a question when she said, don't people care about leaders not telling the truth? She actually put that in a question form, which you kind of answered because you, in a sense, said, wow, that seems to be the case these days for a lot of people. Do you feel that way about it, that our culture doesn't particularly care whether it's truth or lies they're saying?
Well, this is, it turns out that I work in the legal system. And I testify in trials. And I always, before I was testified, I always thought, well, in the courtroom, you all sworn to tell the truth. And so all the lying stops when you get to the courtroom doors. Totally.
Right.
People lie. And so, you know how Eskimos or, the Inuit, they have like 16 words for snow because there's so many kinds of snow, Lawyers have 16 different words for lying. There's lying is a particular kind of not telling the truth, but there's prevarication and there's lack of credibility and there's,
exaggeration,
omission, you didn't know how many ways there were not to tell the truth until you set foot in a courtroom. And so, and I bring this up to say that there's actually different kinds of non-truth telling. So and some kinds are actually more dangerous, and some of them are harder to detect than others. So, for example, let's just take a complicated one that nobody's thinking about anymore because that was so 5 months ago. Climate change. What's the truth about climate change? Does anybody know the truth about climate change? Well, it's an extremely complicated subject. It's also, unfortunately, become co-opted by people who have a political agenda. It's very difficult to figure out what the truth is about climate change. And so if somebody's talking with you about this, you can listen to them. Are they lying? Are they just speaking passionately based on half the truth? Do they actually not? Because it's so complicated, no one really knows what the whole truth is. It's so there's
it's also such a polarized issue that for many people it is a reason not to vote for a particular candidate, right?
Yes, I completely agree. My only point is that when you say people don't care about the truth, it's because the truth is actually a very precious thing, and you actually hear it very rarely. And and unfortunately, one of these times, the times that we are in, are times where people are willing to compromise the truth because of their ideology on both sides. And for a Christian, that's a horrible thing. It's a horrible thing to say climate change is terrible, and we must vote for the Democrat. If what you're doing is saying, I want to vote for the Democrat, then climate change is a good reason to do that, even though I don't.
So if you're using it only as a moment to pander to your audience, which in a sense, kind of goes to the whole thing with the church photo op, which people looked at as a pandering to white evangelical Christians, right? And so my buddy Steve Simmons, he actually drove me to write a blog post about this issue, because I'd asked some questions. How did people view that moment when he stood in front of the church after having cleared the streets? And whether it was tear gas and rubber bullets, or people were debating that. Certainly, some of the teams who were involved, the police were saying, we didn't have the tear gas. It was kind of like they did it, not us. And was it the black op team that doesn't have any name, that works for the president and for for some of the guys in Senate? But we don't know the real story behind this. Right. But it was an ugly event, right?
Yes.
And so I asked the question of a number of my first of Christian leaders and friends, and then I asked the question among non-Christians, and it included, because I spent so much time in Salem, obvious neo-pagans, atheists, and agnostics were answering the question. And Steve noticed that there was a sense of what he called pity that he hadn't seen before, coming from people who were looking at these events, and they were saying, well, how can this guy be a Christian? He can't pander to his audience like that and utilize the symbol of the Bible as some kind of talisman, when really all he's doing is trying to pander to their desire to have, biblical truth put forward in the public square, and it really not be meaningful. But everything he does as an individual is counterposed to that. Stephen noticed that it was my pagan and atheist friends who were in a sense defending my Christianity and having pity toward what was occurring to it through Donald Trump's actions. And so he asked this question: how does it make you feel as a proud American to know that the world is looking at you with pity for having Trump at the wheel?
That's a deep and sad question.
Yeah.
So I guess I would say this: part of my growth as a Christian has been becoming detached from my affection for America. So in the movie Chariots of Fire, there's a great scene where it's about the Olympics and the British Olympic team, but there's a scene where the American Olympic team shows up. And so even though you're in this British movie, like, the Yanks show up at one point. And I remember my reaction was like, the Americans are here. I felt so good. Like, I love these guys. The Brits are terrific, but the Americans are here. And now, like, World War I can end and we can solve the problem. And that was a real deep patriotic feeling. But that's also, in some ways, I have to, if I'm really being honest, that feeling is counterproductive to the real promise that we as Christians have, which is that the kingdom of this world is become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he will reign forever. One of the greatest lines in the Hallelujah chorus. That means being able to say that if the downfall of America means the advancement of the kingdom, then I am in favor of the downfall of America. And I'm not in favor of the downfall of America. I believe that America was founded on good principles, and it's been a tremendously successful experiment, given that you've got sinners, pulling all the levers of power. There's not many other greater examples, and people still flock to America. It's still a great hope, but it's also only temporary. And so, and the thing of it is, God routinely chose leaders as a way of disciplining people who had departed from him, and making their lives harder, and saying, wake up, woe to the nation who's ruled by children. That was really honestly the way that I felt about Obama. Was I felt like, it's not that I didn't like him. He never had a father. He was kind of naive, and I don't know. We're not talking about Obama, but the point of it was, I felt like this was felt like judgment on the country, and I feel like Trump is kind of like judgment on the country. Wake up!
Yeah. It certainly feels that way to me.
Yes, and it can. And the thing of it is, you know what, Phil? It can get a lot worse. It can get a lot worse, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican. It can get a lot worse. So, anyway, to answer your friend Steve's questions, I feel bad. I'm ashamed that we don't have somebody who can stand up and give Kennedy's inaugural address, which I taught to my kids the other day. That was a fantastic piece of oration.
Absolutely.
It made you feel proud of being an American. We don't have that today.
Right.
But no. But so yes, I'm embarrassed. I'm sorry, but that's the truth.
And still, you want me to vote for Trump?
Well, only because here's what I'm doing. I'm actually asking you to vote not for Trump. I'm asking you to vote for the system. The system is one that says people are sinful, and so we can't put power in the hands of any one person or branch of government because they will screw it up. And so there'll be much power in hands other than Trump's if Trump is elected. Whereas if you elect Biden, all the power will be unified in one particular direction. And since power corrupts, that will be a corrupt power, all laboring in the same direction. That's much more likely to be harmful to us in the long run than the kind of confusion and disorder and working at cross purposes that we have right now, which is exactly the way the founders designed it. If there's no consensus, then guess what? You don't move. Good.
Yeah. So Christy, who had mentioned that question earlier, she makes the comment that people get the leaders they deserve, and for her, she's saying that includes us in the UK. And in a sense, that's what you just said. We get what we deserve here, right?
Well, I think I mean, in other words, I think that's probably a worldly and cynical way of expressing the same thing that God expresses in a much more loving and kingdom-oriented way. You can say that you're voted for this person, and how could you possibly vote for this person? But what's really happening, says the Lord, is that I am picking your leaders, and I am chastening you with the people that you're getting. You may think it's just because all those bad Republicans who voted for Trump or all those bad Democrats who voted for Obama. But here's what's really happening. The powers that be are ordained of God, and I am chastening you with the children and the rookies and the carnival barkers and the people, because I want you as a country to change your hearts. That's really what I'm after.
Right. So somebody says here that he's writing in Dewey Oxburger, and Jim Trick, he says, but the butt man and a hairy tick, what are you guys doing together?
Oh, Jim Trick is on? That's awesome. That is awesome.
Yeah.
Jim Trick. I love Jim Trick. So, so hi, Jim. How are you doing?
Where do you know Jim from?
Jim lives in Marblehead, and I've known him for I don't know how many years, from sort of a group of musicians and people that moved here maybe a dozen years ago, something like that. We had a great little community, and we hang out at the Driftwood occasionally, and and
that's how we know each other, through music. So
that's funny. And when you made the joke about Buttman, just so you know, you called me Button because that actually, people called me that when I was 8 years old. They would sing me the Batman song. Na 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 Buttman. I won't tell you the long shaggy dog story, but when I was about 35, somebody actually did a genealogy on our family. It turns out my family name actually is Buttman. So that's that's what he's just pointing that out again for the public.
Right. So Joseph Merrill, and we'll close out here pretty Dr. Buttman, as he goes.
That's right, Dr. Buttman. That's right.
Joseph Merrill makes this throws out a question. What about Trump's 3 years makes you think he shares power? I see him firing people for not being loyal to him.
Yes, I think that Trump
Yeah.
has a misplaced sense of the role of loyalty.
Right.
But the great thing about the system as opposed to Trump. Remember, I didn't say you vote for Trump because of Trump. You vote for Trump because of the system. The great thing about the system is that the people
Right.
swore that their loyalty was not to Donald Trump, but to the Constitution. And so Trump is firing people for not being loyal to him, but the people who are actually, putting their careers on the line are the ones who are saying, I swore to uphold the Constitution, and I'm not sending troops into the streets because the Constitution doesn't let me do that.
Right. Right. So, are you in some sense voting your idea of voting for the system? Are you saying something that Thomas Lupton? Now he's in the UK as well, but he's a Trump would be a Trump supporter here. He says Trump is dismantling the deep state, who have been there for decades. Are you saying that that's part of your voting for the system? Is you think Trump is dismantling some kind of deep state thing?
Um,
I mean, deep state is a problematic thing. It could lead us to QAnon conspiracy theories if you take it too far, right?
Yeah, I don't, I mean, the thing of it is, I think that you have an entrenched bureaucracy of people who, and I think you saw this like with the FBI, that people have a certain set of the correct ideas, and a fraction of those people believe that it's a funny thing, because although they live in the executive branch and they may have sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution, they still work for the chief executive. So the question is, to whom is their loyalty? And I think that you see, Comey and the FBI, people like that, acting in that sense disloyally to the chief executive, not because of Trump, but because they have this enlightened view of what their duty is. And I think it's good that Trump is actually cleaning house in that sense, because those people have a misunderstanding of the role that their ideas play in their job description, and they're not entitled to sort of form the resistance. That's not part of your job description.
Well, we may find ourselves surprised to discover what they were really being was honest within a corrupt system. Bolton may give us a little bit more information when his book does come out. It's supposed to be a scorcher.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear. Well, I'm interested in two things. One is Bolton's book. That's to be very interesting. And the other is the result of the report on the Russian collusion investigation, because I do think that has come up not only as a goose egg for people who wanted Trump to be guilty, but also shown some pretty shady finagling and manipulation of the system by people with strong political preferences. That should be speaking up,
Right.
I'll tell you the truth. And this is I think an important analogy. I look at the situation as being like Balaam's ass. Balaam had an idea of what he was going to accomplish, and how did God shame him? He shamed him by having a donkey rebuke the madness of the prophet. There's a lot of situations where I feel like Trump is basically playing the role of the donkey. It's not like he's some smart guy.
Yeah.
But he is rebuking a system that has gone awry and needs to be corrected. So is that saying, therefore I worship the donkey, or I'm voting for the donkey? No, I'm voting for correction of the system. Right.
Yeah, and in a sense, you have a more positive, less revolutionary view than I suppose Slavoj Žižek, who thought Trump will just turn everything upside down, cause a whole bunch of trouble, and the system will collapse. You're saying Trump's going to cause a whole lot of trouble, and that will help correct and clean up the system?
Well, and the thing of it is, I mean, if it's true that Trump and our recent leaders are represent sort of the chastening of God, then I don't really have any hope yet that the next leader is going to, be some great person, because as far as I can see, it hasn't had the intended effect. So I'm hoping that what will happen is not that the election of Trump will cleanse the system, it will all be fine. I'm hoping that we will all come to repentance and that we actually can get a leader who is behind whom we can unite and who is actually concerned with accomplishing the things that government is supposed to be doing in the world. I mean, you should reread Kennedy's inaugural address. He could never have given that address today. He invoked God repeatedly and talked repeatedly about the need to aid the poor and defeat the evil in the world. And
personally sacrifice instead of expect your nation to do something for you.
Exactly.
I mean, that was the famous line, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Ask what you can do for your country. You know.
Exactly.
So I think,
and we don't see either candidate doing that.
No, I mean it's it's embarrassing.
When was the last time we heard that in the public sphere?
It's because but see, this is the thing.
At
the
most. Now this for me is perhaps an element in support of so much of the protesting. This is a strong element in support of so much of the protesting that's going on right now, and those who are in opposition to Trump. In a sense, that's what a lot of the protesting is saying. This is about us, trying to retake control of something that we think is completely wrong. The police need to ask the question, how do we serve and not rule over? The president needs to ask that question, how do I serve and not just attempt to rule over? And we all as individuals need to ask the question, how do we serve those who have been oppressed? I mean, that is happening at a grassroots level. Maybe not in a way that everybody agrees with, but it's asking those questions of us, right?
Yeah, I think that's a charitable interpretation of the protesters in general. But I understand that the longing for a better world, if you call it that, the longing for a better world and the recognition that this can't be all there is, and these leaders can't be the best that there is, I think is very deep-seated and extremely understandable. And I would never try to hold up Donald Trump as being, open your eyes because he's the solution that you've been waiting for. That's not true. And I am
right.
not hopeful that there is a solution in that sense, because we're dealing with sinful, non-truth-telling, potentially corrupt, egomaniacal, narcissistic individuals on both sides.
Yeah. So I'm going to let that be kind of the closing word here. So I made the comment when I started this that there was a snowball's chance in May that you'd get me to vote for Donald Trump. It may have snowed in Marblehead, Massachusetts in May. It did not in Long Beach, California.
which means you're still not sorry. Not for Trump.
There's not a snowball's chance in a California May.
Do you mind my asking? So you can cut this up whenever you want, but I'm actually curious who you think you'd vote for right now.
I'm waiting for the strongest third party expression to jump out. My vote, being in California, which is bound to go strong Democratic direction, as it did in Massachusetts when I was there in the last election, right? It because it's kind of a sewed up ticket in a way, and my vote doesn't matter that much. And I would probably do this anywhere. I definitely have a third party preference because I want to see a third party get 5% of the national vote and be able to get national funding in the following election. And I'm willing to play the long game because I see enough corruption on both sides of the aisle here that I would like to break the two-party system. That's my personal feeling. So do I have an answer on what rises to the top in that third party? And I can agree with, last time it was Johnson and Weld. What will it be this time? I don't know, but I want to play the long game. And my real preference is Plaid Cymru, the Party of Wales. I want them to have independence from Great Britain. So those are my English friends on there. My sister says, go Trump.
Is that right, really?
Yeah, she's listening, and she says, go Trump. So her and her husband, they definitely feel that way. My brother probably leans that way a little bit. Although this recent thing with the the church photo op. My brother's in the Coast Guard and had some years in the Navy, and he's looking at it from the perspective of the military, and he just went, "Wow, that was bad."
Yep.
You know, and so we had to talk about that. And Doc Gosling says, "Good for you, Phil. Plaid Cymru." Cymru am byth. Sort of my friends in Wales who've been watching. That's for you too. So yeah, this is Jon Putnam. Hey, it's been great talking with you. So for those of you who are wondering why I am trying to get people to convince me to vote for Trump, this dialogue here is part of it. I don't think people are talking through the issues in friendly ways. And John, you model it like a champ. You rock, bro.
Not I, but Christ, so that's really how it goes. I know that in me there dwells no good thing.
Well, good things are coming out of you, so.
Thank you. It's actually awesome. I really appreciate the invitation. It's great to see your smiling face. I'm sorry you're not back in Salem, and the next time you are, I'll buy you a beverage of your choice.
All right. Yeah, it'd be nice to have a pint.
There you go.
So we'll see what happens with October and staging. I may be back there for that, may not. We don't know what Halloween in Salem looks like. I mean, people are going to show up, but what's the city going to do? Yeah. So
hey, give your mom a giant hug. You're fortunate. My mom's gone now for 5 years, and give your mom a big hug, because it is every day is a privilege, and one day there is that you can't do that. So
right, yeah.
I know it's not easy.
So, Christy, who had asked a question and put in a few comments, she goes, "Really good conversation." I certainly feel that way about it. Although Jim Trick wants us to fist fight now. Come on, put up your nukes. Put up your nukes.
We got to get Jim on here to do some of his Brazilian Taekwondo or Jiu-Jitsu. Sorry, Jim, I forget what it's called, but he's the martial arts guy. So
okay, Jim Trick, you hear that? I'd like to put you on Wild Theology at some point. It'd be a hoot.
Jim would be great. Jim would be.
He would be. Awesome. Yeah. I love Jim. So I've got a guitar that came from Jim.
You guys could have dueling arguments, and so here's why I'm going to vote for Biden, and here's why I'm going to vote for Trump, like that.
I think Jim and I are probably closer politically. I don't think he's going to get me to vote for. He's going to try to get me to vote for Trump. Are you, Jim? Are you going to do that? But he says, "Let's do it." So Jim Trick. Jim Trump. Sorry about that, bro.
It's almost the same thing.
Yeah, right. He called you Buttman. We can call him Jim Trump. Okay, so that's all for Wild Theology, and convince me to vote for Trump, and there'll be more of this coming up. Hey, thanks, bro. That was awesome.
Be
Thank
safe.
you.
We'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.